This day in sports history. Hey, and welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. It's September 15th, and on this day in 1978, Muhammad Ali avenged his loss against Leon Spinks. This fight is not one of the greatest of all time. It was a very lackluster affair by most accounts, and a drastic contrast to the fight between these two 7 months earlier. In fight number 1 back in February, Spinks was the young stallion eager to come out of the gate and prove himself. Ali was the tired workhorse that barely trained before stepping into the ring in that one. The fight still went 15 rounds, with Spinks being the aggressor and the winner in a split decision. In the rematch on this day, billed as the Battle of New Orleans, Ali came in much more prepared, and Spinks was a bit complacent. The fight was held at the New Orleans Superdome, and at the time, it was the largest crowd to watch a fight in person at 70,000, and it was also the largest gate for a fight, with people paying an average of $75 a ticket to watch it. Ali was the decided fan favorite in this one, and the Superdome crowd kept him energized, chanting his name and screaming throughout, and especially whenever he landed a punch. This wasn't the Ali of old, but an old Ali who managed to bring a little bit of magic to the ring. He moved enough to stay out of the way of Spinks' punches, fending off jabs with left hooks and right uppercuts. The knife wasn't as sharp, but it could still cut a softer opponent. Spinks didn't really seem to want to be there anyway. The stalking that he had done in the first fight was not evident in the rematch. The 36-year-old Ali outlasted Spinks for the 15 rounds, and he won a unanimous decision. In doing so, Ali won the World Heavyweight title for an unprecedented third time. This was also Ali's last win. He would retire in June 1979, only to return to the ring in 1980 to face Larry Holmes and then Trevor Berbick in 1981, losing both of those. Look, I can attest to the fact that sometimes a person can put in a whole lot of work and still not get any results. And that can be frustrating, especially when you see somebody put in zero effort and then succeed. Take, for example, what happened this year on June 21st when Oakland's Scott Newcomb did not throw a single pitch and ended up the winner in a game with the Minnesota Twins. And then contrast that with what Steve Carlton did on this day in 1969 and still wound up losing the game. Carlton got the start against the New York Mets and proceeded to strike out the side in the first, second, and fourth innings. Unfortunately for Carlton, between his strikeouts in the fourth, Mets right fielder Ron Swoboda blasted a 2-run homer. Carlton kept throwing strikes and kept the Mets looking and swinging at smoke. Well, all Mets except for Swoboda, who came up in the eighth with a man on and hit another 2-run dinger. When Carlton took the mound in the ninth inning, he needed 2 strikeouts to tie the Major League record. He struck out Tug McGraw, then sat down Bud Harrelson, and broke the record with his 19th strikeout on the night against the rookie Amos Otis. But Carlton just did not get the run support he needed, and he took the loss 4-3. Carlton's 19 strikeouts in a 9-inning game would stand alone for less than a year. Tom Seaver, who watched Carlton's feat on this night from the Mets bullpen, equaled it in April 1970. And then Nolan Ryan would strike out 19 in August of 1974. Those 3 would stand alone until Roger Clemens struck out 20 in 1986 to claim the record. So I mentioned contrast earlier, and we can take the Steve Carlton complete game 19 strikeout record performance and go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum and what happened on this day in 1971. It's been a few months now since I did the story, but the sad tale of Moonlight Graham should be a familiar one to you, whether you remember that episode or have watched the movie Field of Dreams. But quick refresher, Moonlight Graham, real guy, real player, called up to the majors, put into the game late, standing in the on-deck circle when the last out is recorded. Season ends, never gets a chance to swing the bat in the majors. Well, there was a pitching equivalent that happened on this day in 1971. The Houston Astros were playing the Atlanta Braves. In the top of the ninth, Larry Yount was brought in to pitch to Hank Aaron with the Astros trailing 4-1. And if the name Yount sounds familiar, then yes, he was the older brother to future Hall of Famer Robin Yount, who played with the Milwaukee Brewers for 20 years. Well, Larry had just been called up from Houston's AAA team, and anytime a reliever is brought into the game, they get to take some warm-up pitches. Larry threw one warm-up pitch, and he felt a sharp pain in his right elbow. He tried to work it out and threw a few more, but the pain was just too intense. He motioned to the bench that he couldn't go on, and he was removed from the game without throwing an official pitch. The injury caused him to be sent back to the minors, where he spent a few more years there until retiring in 1975. And he never got the call-up to the majors again. But since he was officially announced in this one major league game, even though he did not throw an official pitch, you can find the name Larry Yount in the official records. Other than for Larry, this was a pretty good day to get some things started. In 1973, Ohio State sophomore running back Archie Griffin ran the ball 15 times for 129 yards. That stat doesn't jump out at you, especially when you realize this came in a 56-7 drubbing of Minnesota. But his 129 yards on this day started a string of 31 consecutive games, not including bowl games, with at least 100 rushing yards, which still stands as the FBS record. This was the opening weekend for the Buckeyes in the 1973 season, and his streak of 100-plus yard games did not end until 1975 in a game versus Michigan. On this day in 2002, Raiders quarterback Rich Gannon threw for 403 yards in a game against Pittsburgh. That was the first of 6 straight games throwing for 300 or more, setting a new NFL record. He finished that year with 10 300-yard games. Gannon held on to that record until Drew Brees put together a run of 9 straight games with at least 300 through the air in the 2011 season. And if you are old enough or watched a little too many NFL films productions from the 60s and early 70s, then you may know that the goalposts in an NFL end zone were at one time located in the front of the end zone. Well, on this day in 1974, it was a new era in the NFL when the season started with the goalposts in the back of the end zone. Now, you wouldn't be too far off if you thought they were moved because of it being a safety issue. The front end zone posts, and in the earlier days, they were using the H posts with 2 legs in the ground instead of the slingshot posts you see now. But they were also used as an extra blocker with receivers using the legs to screen defenders. It also made for quite an obstruction if you had to throw or punt out of the end zone. But the real reason the goalposts were moved back was to make it a little tougher to make a field goal. Kicking stats had improved over the years, and it was becoming more of a sure thing. So the league moved them back to reduce the number of made three-pointers. Comparing 1973, when the posts were still at the front, to 1974, when they moved back, the 74 season saw an average of 12 less field goal attempts per team, or about 1 less per team per game, and close to 8 less made field goals per team over the season. So, it did have the desired effect. Time now for today's non-sports fun fact. There were active volcanoes on the moon when the dinosaurs were alive. Scientists say the moon's last volcanic activity was a relatively recent 125 million years ago. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.